Hey, what's up guys? So the other day I put out a video about all of the horror games that I've been playing lately that are worth emulating on the Steam Deck, mostly from the PS2 and GameCube era, with a real oddball GBA Silent Hill experience thrown in for good measure. But today I just wanted to go over some of the games that I'm playing on Steam Deck that you can natively pick up on that system through Steam, along with one bonus entry that I'm playing for Halloween that is not for the Steam Deck, but we'll get to that in a bit. For now, just know that these initial entries are all purchasable on the Steam Marketplace, and will be linked below as is pretty routine at this point. And let's kick this spooky adventure off with a game that I'd only played the demo for last year, but now I finally got a chance to dive in full force through Halloween and completely finish this game and wrap it up finally, and that would be Mouthwashing. And like I mentioned, I actually originally played this in a demo video that I did last year talking about some demos that you should definitely check out, and initially I found it to be pretty unsettling and cryptic, which as a Silent Hill fan that makes total sense. And thankfully, between when it first came out and, well, when I just wrapped it up here about a week ago, I was able to completely avoid any spoilers about the plot, which is great because this is a very short game that I could have sworn was going to take like 4 to 6 hours to complete, but actually you can beat this game in about 2 to 3 hours and probably closer to 2 if you're, well, better at it than I was. And honestly, I wish more horror games would go this route because 2 to 3 hours for a scary game feels like just like the perfect meal for anybody who's hungry for a good horror story but doesn't necessarily want to spend like an entire week of playtime to get to the end. And to kind of keep that food analogy going, I did see that some people were saying this was on par with or better than Silent Hill 2, and I mean, putting aside my personal massive bias towards Silent Hill, I'll just say that is a really bold claim. If Silent Hill 2 is a filet mignon, then at best Mouthwashing is like a really good T-bone. It'll still fill you up, still tastes great, but it just does not have the same gravitas as something like Silent Hill 2. But that's not to take anything away from it. And if you're not familiar, the basic premise is that you're on a ship that is a long-haul space freighter among a crew of 4 people. Unfortunately, the spaceship gets terribly damaged, and in a Tarantino-type way, you'll be kind of ping-ponging back and forth between the present and the past to piece together the larger mystery. At its core, it is basically a walking simulator with a few really neat twists in the latter half. But it just did such a good job at establishing a wonderful atmosphere and had solid writing for the characters that I really found myself completely invested in it, and in turn I knocked this out in a single sitting over one about 2.5 to 3 hour marathon session. Visually, it is absolutely stunning. It looks like if you had a PS1 game that was taken to its absolute limits back in the day in terms of fidelity, it would look like this. Lighting and sound are used to tremendous effect, and while there aren't a ton of jump scares in the game or anything like that, there's still plenty of unnerving moments, and even though they have a very small environment that you'll be traversing when it comes to the ship for reasons that actually make sense from a story perspective, it was consistently unnerving for me to sort of make my way back between the various parts of the ship, whether that was utilities or medical or the cockpit. And while it's a bit of a slow burn at first, it does ramp up pretty quickly, which out of necessity it probably has to, since it's only, again, about 2 or 3 hours long. And I have to say, if you have a free evening and you're looking for just like a good spooky story to take in, Mouthwashing will definitely deliver. Also, something else that I really appreciated about this was, even though there are definitely some surrealistic elements to how the story plays out, most of the narrative is very straightforward and approachable, which I definitely appreciate. And it's not that I have a problem with grander surrealistic stories that get told in the horror genre. I think they're incredibly cool, and I love how people will just endlessly pour over the different facts and lore bits that are scattered around the environment to really piece everything together. But sometimes it really is nice to just have a straightforward story that you can enjoy without having to wonder if you missed a bunch of stuff along the way or if you can't really piece the story together. And to be clear, this game does not have multiple endings so far as I know. I do think there's some extra dialogue bits you can get depending on some of the choices that you make, but ultimately it does tell a nice, self-contained horror story, and it's one that I'm glad I finally took the time to sit down and play this Halloween. And a quick note on performance, it runs pretty much butter smooth on the Steam Deck. I had no issues to speak of, keeping it at pretty much a solid 60 throughout, and it didn't seem to drain the battery in any significant way either, so that's kind of a nice bonus. Now, this next game actually is a demo that I've been playing on the Steam Deck, and the only reason I'm playing the demo is because I'm not 100% sure if I'm going to buy the physical PS5 copy or the Steam copy to start, and I just want to get a feel for it, and that would be Tormented Souls 2. And you might remember I mentioned this in the 10 games coming in October video last month, but now it's finally here, and I have to say it is delivering on all fronts. Well, all fronts except for one, and sadly that front is a major one, and that would be Steam Deck performance. While the visuals are definitely a step up from the original, that really does come at the cost of performance on the Steam Deck, and I knew I was in trouble from the opening in-engine cutscene because it tanked down to something like 13 frames per second. And even after making adjustments, I couldn't quite get this even to a stable 30 FPS at 720p, but hey, that's the beauty of demos, I guess. You get to try before you buy, and in this case, while I'm definitely loving the game so far, just like the original, I'm likely to pick up a physical copy for the PS5 so I can enjoy it there, rather than continue on the Steam Deck with what I've seen in the demo so far. But putting aside the performance, let's go ahead and talk about the game itself. Now, the original Tormented Souls was about our Canadian protagonist Caroline Walker exploring a creepy asylum, and this one has her exploring a spooky monastery to start in the decaying remains of a secluded village. Which, no shade at our protagonist Caroline, but it does seem like a questionable choice to return to a location like this after the first game was so centered around a bunch of creepy, dogmatically religious elements, but I can allow for a thin setup like this in the interest of exploring a spooky monastery, I guess. And while Caroline doesn't wake up missing an eye in this game, she does eventually wake up to what looks like some pretty amateurish acupuncture, because I guess the devs just really like roughing Caroline up before these stories kick off. On the gameplay front, it is largely unchanged from the formula of the original. This is typical Resident Evil fare with some improvements, like a chime when you're out of ammo, prompting you to reload, and naturally it's filled to the brim with fixed camera angles, which are awesome for dramatic effect, but a little bit rough if you're not familiar with using tank controls. Sure, you could just use a modern control stick option, but the problem with that is, with a fixed camera system, as soon as you exit frame on one camera and enter another one, you're now going in the opposite direction, you kind of keep going back and forth, but yeah, I'm not saying it can't be played with anything but tank controls, but that will definitely be the most effective way you can play this game. And a quick note on those tank controls, I did find the quick turnaround to be just a little bit finicky. Historically, the first thing I try in games like this that I know feature tank controls is to hit like the action and run button or some combination of a face button and back to see if I'll do a quick turnaround. And while it does do it in this game, it doesn't do it if you hit them simultaneously, but rather you first have to hit back on the D-pad and then hold X. Which, I mean in the most literal sense, I guess it makes sense that you would physically need to begin stepping back before executing a quick turn in real life, but it does feel a little bit unnecessary here. Combat and puzzles are about what you'd expect. You can lock onto individual enemies and switch targets as needed, often firing out of frame, again thanks to those fixed camera angles, and you will start off equipped again with your trusty nail gun that you cobble together with some spare parts you find lying around. Now, from an actual fear factor perspective, the pacing is great. It isolates you and eases you into the horrors of the monastery as it slowly lets you reacclimate to what is distinctly a retro horror experience. The sound design is pretty restrained and unsettling, with just enough haunting melodies to fill the silence while you inch down darkened hallways towards random crashes or screams from roaming monsters. And speaking of darkened hallways, just like the original, you can't just hang out in the shadows for too long because you will eventually start taking damage and then die because of vague reasons, which is another sort of hackneyed mechanic, I guess, from a narrative perspective. But I'm okay with it because mechanically it does make for some really tense moments when lights start dynamically going out around you, and naturally any horror game is going to be a lot more scary when you take away that safety blanket of a light source. At the end of the day, if you're a Resident Evil fan, you're probably going to enjoy this, although if you're a Resident Evil fan who wants to play it on the Steam Deck, you will probably not enjoy it so much again. The performance is really lackluster here, and I'm not sure if they can really do much to optimize this for the Steam Deck, but yeah, if you have a gaming rig or if you have a console you can play it on, that would probably be the better place to experience this, well, love letter to Resident Evil. But now let's turn away from like single-player narrative horror experiences, because I'm going to mention a game that I talk about on Twitter frequently, and I just love it so much, but it is particularly fun this time of year, and that would be Dead by Daylight, specifically the Haunted by Daylight event. And if you've never played Dead by Daylight before, there's no better time than now to hop in. There are just a shocking number of survivors and killers you can play as. The standard game mode is 4 survivors versus 1 killer, and the goal is to power up 5 generators, open the exit gates, and ultimately escape, although it is a very temporary victory because every time the survivors escape, the horrifying entry that oversees these trials puts them right back at the campfire, where they simply wait for another trial to begin. And that is exactly why this game can take thousands of hours of your time, like it has done for me. But in the Haunted by Daylight mode, it does mix it up in a few interesting ways. For starters, you can still open portals to the Void, which is kind of a subset of the map that you're on, although while you're in the Void, the killer will know you're there and can kind of sneak up on you because I believe they get the undetectable status while they're in the Void. But while you're there, you can retrieve Void crystals, and as a survivor, you can take these and either smash them to create a giant fog effect so you can kind of escape the killer if you get stuck in chase, or you can slot them into gens on the map to allow them to start auto-repairing themselves to a certain percentage. This makes for a lot of fun late game plays where you might 99 a gen or get it very close to being completed, you drop in one of the crystals, and then you can go ahead and run towards the exit gate knowing that it's going to power up on its own, assuming the killer doesn't kick it and cause it to start regressing. But the killer has some tricks up their sleeve too. Depending on the void energy that they gather during this, they can actually weaponize haunts that are actually in the void that can slow you down. And naturally, taking place in this event allows you to get cool in-game cosmetics and different items for killers and survivors, so yeah, it's just a great time overall, and I really appreciate that the behavior makes the different quests that you complete on the way to earning those rewards easily approachable for anybody to enjoy, and you don't necessarily have to play both Killer and Survivor to get those rewards. If you're a Killer main, you should be able to just get them that way. If you're a Survivor main, you can play them just playing Survivor as you normally would. So yeah, just a fun event all around, and naturally I'm having a great time with it. I'm not going to pretend that Dead by Daylight is an easy game to get into necessarily. After all, at this point they do have, I believe, 41 killers and 48 survivors with 3 perks each, so that is hundreds of different types of ways you can modify the game, and if you're somebody who appreciates the idea of a horror coat of paint on an asymmetrical cat and mouse game, Dead by Daylight is still just super fun. I will die on this hill, I love it so much. Or maybe die on the soak would be more appropriate. And I've actually been playing this a little bit on the Steam Deck, even though I predominantly played this game on the PS5. When I went out to Austin to visit my buddy Ben a few weeks back so we could do a bunch of spooky Halloween stuff, I played there while he played on the Xbox. And then I captured some footage, specifically of Haunted by Daylight, to play for this video. And I believe at medium settings, you can get a pretty solid 60 FPS. Now if you bump it up to something like high, or I think it even has an ultra setting, I think you get closer to 30 or a little bit below, which probably isn't ideal. But yeah, this is a completely playable game on the Steam Deck, especially if you don't mind the graphics taking a little bit of a hit, which honestly, from a technical perspective, Dead by Daylight doesn't have the sharpest graphics anyways. It's an almost 10-year-old game at this point, and none of the artistry on display really suffers that much if you bump it down to medium anyways. And if any of you are already playing Dead by Daylight, please do let me know in the comments below, because I absolutely love to just nerd out about this game so much, because it's just endlessly entertaining for anybody who's a horror fan. Also, the game is just pretty objectively hilarious, considering it blends so many different horror icons together. For instance, in this match that you're seeing right now, I am playing as Steve Harrington from Stranger Things, being chased by Nemesis from Resident Evil 3 in Midwich Elementary from Silent Hill. That's just tremendous. But next up, let's check out a little bit of retro horror with a game that looks like it's emulated, but I promise you it's an actual Steam game that was recommended to me by a longtime commenter and general channel buddy Titanblade, who mentioned this in the comments some time back: Evil Tonight. And right off the bat, you'll notice this is a top-down, 16-bit pixelated sort of affair, and it is another brilliant throwback to old-school Resident Evil. Aside from its chunky pixelated graphics and a pretty intriguing story about a modern exorcist, everything about the game just feels really tightly designed. I had no issues navigating any of the menus, using firearms or your melee weapon felt really smooth and natural, and while I wouldn't say resources are overly abundant, they're not so restricted that the game ever felt frustrating to me in any significant way. Don't get me wrong, it definitely has survival elements, but so far the difficulty feels approachable rather than punishing, which is great because I'm very curious to see where the story goes here, and much like Mouthwashing, this is a fairly short game that I believe you can beat in about 4 to 8 hours, so not super short, but not so long that it will be exhausting and take you weeks and weeks to finish or anything like that. Now from a fear factor perspective, at least so far in my early time with this game, I would say it's pretty consistently spooky, but not outright scary, at least from a presentation perspective. Although I'm not entirely through the story yet, obviously, and if Doki Doki Literature Club taught me anything, it's not to underestimate the raw terror that 2D games like this can actually dish out. Predictably, when it comes to performance, it is super stable and functional on the Steam Deck with absolutely no jank to speak of, and I didn't have any controller problems or weirdness like that. I was able to just fire up the game, start taking in the story, and immediately start exploring its creepy locale, while I just enjoyed a Resident Evil experience in 2D, which is not something I get to check out very often. So Titanblade, thank you again for the recommendation, and while I don't think I'm going to finish this one by the time Halloween actually hits, I'm still excited to spend more time with it and appreciate you taking the time to point it out to me. And finally, as a bonus, this is a weird game that technically speaking you could emulate and play on the Steam Deck right now, although I've already played it on the Steam Deck, I played it on its original hardware, and now I'm going to play it on official hardware on the Nintendo Switch 2, and that would be Luigi's Mansion coming to NSO on, I think today when this video goes out, right on the eve of Halloween, which is just about perfect. Although, right now I'm just going to have to show you trailer footage of Luigi's Mansion running on Switch, and I suspect that it will run pretty well, probably similar to how Zelda Wind Waker looks a little bit better on the Switch. Granted, I would have preferred a full HD remake, but I'll take what I can get at this point, and at the very least, hey, we can now play Luigi's Mansion 1, 2, and 3 on a single system. And if you've not played it before, essentially the premise is Luigi gets notified about winning a mansion in a contest that he mysteriously never entered, he tells Mario to meet up with him, and when Luigi heads to the mansion, before you know it, you are smack in the middle of a spooky adventure at a creepy house with tons of Pixar-style ghosts that are looking to spook and harass you. Thankfully, you have your trusty Poltergust 3000 as a makeshift proton pack of sorts, allowing you to just get to work unraveling the mystery, busting ghosts, and just having a ton of spooky fun along the way. And again, this is technically, I guess, an emulated title that you could check out on the Steam Deck or officially through Nintendo, I guess. And visually, I'm sure it'll be at least a little bit cleaned up on the Switch compared to the GameCube, but again, if you just want to get an idea of whether this kind of game's going to be right for you, I think you could probably still grab a demo for Luigi's Mansion 2 or 3 potentially on NSO, or again, you could always just emulate it. Obviously, the fear factor for a game like this is going to be completely non-existent, which makes it the perfect low-octane spooky title to play at Halloween as we transition towards the Thanksgiving holiday, especially if you've been playing more grisly fare this Halloween with something like Silent Hill F like I did, and believe me, this is about the polar opposite of that. I'm not sure if I'll play all the way through when I download it on the Switch 2 later, but I am excited to dive back into that world and have a lot of nostalgic fondness for this game in particular. If you remember when the GameCube first came out like 25 years ago at this point, or 24 years ago I think, there were only a handful of games that launched with it. I think it might have just been Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3 and Luigi's Mansion, which that was the first Nintendo console to not launch with a Mario game, and even though I was apprehensive about the game initially, thinking it wouldn't really be that great, I had a wonderful time with it and it still holds a special place in my heart, especially during spooky season. But that's going to be it for this one. After recently having re-beaten the Silent Hill 2 remake, then the OG Silent Hill 2 with my buddy Ben out in Texas a few weeks back, and then Silent Hill F, I was definitely ready for some more bite-sized spooky games, and I think this list of games, or this selection of titles, were just like the perfect way to kind of round things out. And naturally, I love just chilling on my couch with the Steam Deck while watching the Halloween or Freddy movies in the background, while I soaked in a lot of the terror these games had to offer. But hey, what about you? What spooky games have you been playing on the deck or otherwise? Have you been dipping into some older titles? Is there a new release that you've had a lot of fun with? If so, please let me know in the comments below. As far as what's coming up on the channel, we'll be taking a look at some games coming in November soon, and then beyond that, probably also dip back into some emulation content, but we'll see what happens. As always, thank you so much for taking the time to hang out with me here on the channel. I really appreciate it. Have an amazing day, and I will see you on the next one. Bye.